Hey, welcome back to Lesson 3 of Discovering After Effects. Once again, I'm Casey Ferris. In this lesson, we're going to learn about animation and keyframes. So right now, we're going to walk through making a simple little animation. We're going to learn a little bit about what keyframes are and the best ways to use them. So let's get started. I have a little background here that I made for our scene, and we're going to animate this bouncing red ball. And I'll show you exactly how we do it. So I'm going to drag my PNG file, just a little red ball I made in Illustrator, and I'm going to scale it down a little bit, and that looks pretty good. I'll just put it in the middle for now. So let's talk about keyframes. A keyframe is setting a specific value for a property at a specific time. And I guess the easiest way to think about this is by animating a position. And so I'm going to hit P for position on my red ball, and I'm going to click this little stopwatch here. So when I click that stopwatch, it's going to set a keyframe. So what I'm telling After Effects is at 2 seconds and 13 frames, I want the position to be 905, 650.7. And I'm actually going to move this to the beginning. So now I'm saying at this point in time, I want the ball to be here. Great. So I'm going to move my slider down to 1 second, and I'm going to set another keyframe. Now you see that this clock's already pressed, but I can go over here, and this is kind of our like keyframe jumper thing, and so I can click in the middle and that adds or takes away a keyframe, and so I do want to add a keyframe, and then I can also hit these arrows and go in between them. So that's good. We have no animation so far, but we're telling the ball to be here at 1 second and at 0 seconds. Now I'm going to make this ball bounce, and so in the middle, about 16 frames in, let's say, I want this ball to be straight up. So probably up in the air, just about like that. And you'll notice when I drag that up, it makes a little line here. This is a motion path. It has little boxes around your keyframes, and it has little dots kind of in between. And each one of these dots stands for a frame that's in between your keyframes. So after I hit my RAM preview, I see our ball is going up and down, which is convenient because that's exactly what we wanted. I'm going to have the ball start up in the air. So I'm going to go to my first keyframe, and I'm going to hit this add or remove keyframe thing, and there it goes. Now I can select these keyframes and move them anywhere I want. And so I'm going to move this at the beginning, so it's going to start in the air and then hit the ground. But then I want it to bounce up in the air again. And so I can drag it up in the air. And if I grab this ball or I change its position here in the sliders, it automatically adds a keyframe because it's pretty much thinking that if I'm changing stuff around, I probably want it to be animated. So it's right. So that looks pretty good. But the thing is, I want this to bounce a few times, but I don't want to go through and move the slider down, move it down, move the slider down, move it up, slider down, move it down, just because that's annoying. And guess what? I don't quite hit the same place every time. It just kind of bounces wherever. So I don't want that. So I'm going to delete these keyframes, and I'm going to select these first two and hit Command C for copy, and go over a little bit and hit Command V for paste, and Command V for paste. So we have this ball going up and down, and it's stopping at the same place and it's ending at the same place each time, which isn't really realistic, but that's kind of what I want for now. So now we have the ball bouncing up and down, but it still looks kind of weird because it goes up to the top and then stops instantly, goes to the bottom, stops instantly, and it just kind of looks weird. The reason for that is because in real life, if there was a ball bouncing, at the very peak of its bounce, it's not going to stop instantly. It's going to kind of slow down because gravity is going to take over, and then it's going to bring it back down to the ground, which is not what's happening in our animation. It's just stopping instantly and going back. So how do we fix this? All of these keyframes right here are linear keyframes. So to kind of show you what I mean, I'm going to go to my graph editor, which is this little button right here. And what this does is shows my animation as a graph instead of just a bunch of points in time. And the only thing that's kind of weird is that this keyframe is actually below this keyframe on the canvas. So this keyframe right here is the top of our peak. This keyframe is the bottom. And that's just because of the way that After Effects deals with position. It's kind of weird, but you can get used to it. And so all of these keyframes are the peaks of our bounce. And so I don't want them to be sharp like this. I want this graph to be smooth. So one of the easiest ways to smooth out keyframes is easy ease. So there's a few ways I can do this, but the easiest way is just to hit F9. Boom. Smooths out that graph. So instead of being pointy right here, it's nice and smooth, which is what we want. So now let's see what this does to our animation. You'll notice that at the top of the peak, it doesn't just come back instantly. It goes up and it slows down and then it comes back up. Looks a lot more natural. And we don't want to ease our bottom keyframes because it is kind of bouncing and coming back pretty much instantly. And so we do want that kind of bouncy look. So that's looking pretty good. Mind you, this is all keyframes just on the position. And actually it's just on the Y position. We'll get to the X position in just a moment. So, X position. Anyway, what I'm going to do is take this ball and I'm going to pre-comp it. So I'm going to select my layer, go up to layer and hit pre-compose. And we're going to talk a lot more about pre-comps, but for now, basically what we're doing is grouping this. So I'm going to make sure to move all attributes and I'm going to hit OK. And you'll notice that if I bring up position, there's no position keyframes. That's because this ball is kind of grouped with itself, which is a little bit confusing, but if you double click and enter the pre-comp and then you go to your layer and hit P for position, you'll notice all our keyframes are still there. And so this is basically just taking this layer and moving it into a new composition. And so now we're treating this whole thing pretty much like video footage. So it's the same thing as if I rendered this comp and brought it back in. It's just without rendering and it's higher quality. And but you can treat it just like footage. So now I want to get it to kind of bounce across the screen. So because this is pre-composed, we have our position keyframes all cleared, looks nice. And so I'm going to bring this over here, just off screen, and I'm going to hit my stopwatch. And then at the end of my animation, I'm going to bring this over off screen again. And so now I'm making this motion trail with the position, and it's just going across the screen. So when we play it back, it looks like it's bouncing across the screen. But remember, we're just moving that pre-comped layer. This ball is still just bouncing up and down. So now we have this ball bouncing across the landscape. Looks pretty good, but we can make this look even better. So what I'm going to do is add a little bit of squish to this ball. So it's pretty simple. It's just that when this ball hits, I want it to kind of squish down like it's a squishy rubber ball. And so I'm going to go back into my pre-comp and I'm going to go to a keyframe where it's hitting the ground. So there's our keyframe at 14 frames. And I'm going to hit Shift S, and that's going to bring up my scale attribute. And I'm going to hit a keyframe on my scale. So now I'm just going to squish this down using the scale attribute. But first I want to make sure that this ball is round while it's in the air. And so on this keyframe when it's on the ground, I'm going to back up just a couple frames to just before it hits the ground. And I'm going to set a keyframe there. And then I'm going to go a couple frames forward. Boom. Set a keyframe there. So what this is going to do is make kind of a little animation of this squishing really quick. And so I'm going to go to the very bottom keyframe and I'm going to take off my constrained proportions. And I'm going to take the Y scale and I'm going to bring it down just a little bit. Doesn't have to be much, but just a little bit. So now it's just a little bit more animated, and maybe I'll squish it a little more just so you can see it a lot better. Boom. So that's a little exaggerated, but a little bit easier to see. So now I'm going to back out, and I'm going to put these 3 keyframes everywhere that there is a bottom keyframe, which are these little diamond ones right here. So I'm going to select these and hit Command C, move down, hit Command V, zoom in and align these with the bottom keyframe, move down, Command V, zoom in, align it, move down, Command V, zoom in and align it. So now when this bounces, it's going to squish. Looking pretty good. So a lot more animated, a lot more fun now. So now we go back to our original comp and we have it squishing and jumping across the landscape. So we've keyframed our position and keyframed our scale. Looks pretty natural, looks pretty good. Now I just want to make this animation just a little bit cooler, and I'm going to add a shadow. And there's a few different ways you can add a shadow, but since I already have the keyframes in this ball animation, I'm going to use that to make a quick shadow. So I'm going to pre-compose and group it with itself. And so now we basically have footage of this whole animation and clean keyframes, clean attributes. So that's great, because what I'm going to do is take this and duplicate it. I'm going to hit Command D, and I'm going to scale this like this, squish it down just a little bit and make it upside down. And I'm going to find a frame where the ball is hitting the ground at the ultimate squish point right there. And I'm just going to move this duplicate layer down. There we have our ball bouncing with this little reflection looking thing, which is good, but I want this to be a shadow. So I'm going to take this layer and bring it under, and I'm just going to name it shadow so things don't get confusing. And I'm going to go to my effect controls, and I'm going to go to curves and just bring this top thing down. Just make this ball completely black. Now it looks pretty good, except for it's a little bit too dark, and most of the time shadows are a little bit softer than that. So I'm going to take my shadow layer and I'm going to add a blur. I'm just going to go with fast blur and blur it a little bit. And then I'm going to hit T for transparency or opacity and bring this down quite a bit. So I can preview it, and that's a pretty good looking shadow, pretty good animation, but I can even make this better if I wanted to. And one of the ways I can make this better is animating some of the properties of this shadow. You'll notice that just about everything in After Effects has a little clock on it. And if a property has a clock by it, it means you can animate it. So I'm going to animate the blurriness on my shadow. So I'm going to pick a frame where this is squished the most, and I'm going to set a keyframe for my blurriness. I'm going to select my layer and hit U, because U brings up everything that's animated, everything that has keyframes. So there's my keyframe when the ball's on the ground. Now we need the ball in the air, which is looking right about there. So I'm going to set another keyframe, and I'm going to make this way blurrier, because when this ball gets closer to the ground, its shadow is going to be a lot sharper. In fact, I'm going to sharpen this shadow even more. Something like that, so you can really see the difference there. And now I can take this and same thing, copy it, paste it over here, and align it just the way I want. There's my squish right there. And so now I have this animated shadow that softens and sharpens depending on how far away this ball is from the ground. Looking pretty good. You can also do the same thing with transparency if you wanted to. And this is a pretty simple example, but you can actually do some really advanced stuff just with keyframes. So that should give you a nice understanding of how keyframes work in After Effects and how you can animate a layer's properties or even a layer's effects. Now I want to talk about something that's similar to keyframes, but it's a little bit confusing. And what I'm talking about is time remapping. So here I have footage of a car driving into a parking lot, and I want to time ramp this. It's exactly like animating with keyframes, although instead of setting a position or a value in time, you're actually setting a time in time, which sounds really confusing, and the reason why is because it is. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to right click on my footage, and I'm going to go to Time, Enable Time Remapping. And that brings up my time remap thing here, and it already has the stopwatch clicked. So that means that any changes I make are going to be keyframed. So let's take a look at these keyframes. This first keyframe is set at 0. At 0 seconds, I want you to play 0 on the video. And then at 13 seconds and 11 frames, play 13:11 on the footage. And so if I were to set a keyframe in the middle, then at 6:20, I want to show frame 6:20. So now, if I move this over a little bit, then now I'm telling it at 209, I want you to play 620. And so from here to here, there's almost 7 seconds of footage packed into this 2 seconds in our comp. And so that's where we get our, sped up motion as well as the slower motion later. So you can kind of play around with this and get some pretty cool effects. And so what I want to do is have this car zoom in right here and then slow motion right about here. Give me some nice slow motion and then zoom off. So I'm going to go to the first frame where I want the speed to change, and maybe I'll do it right there, 707. And I'm going to hit my keyframe, and then I'm going to go to where I want the speed to change again. Let's say 829. That sounds good. So now I have 2 keyframes set, and nothing's actually changed in the playback of this video. If you were to preview it, it would play just normal speed. And so the changes happen when I move these keyframes. And so I'm going to crunch these first 2 right here and make it play back faster. Crunching about 7 seconds into about 2.5 seconds. And then I'm going to play normal speed for now. And then I want it to go fast again, so I'm going to bring the rest of the footage in and have it zoom out fast. And I'm going to preview it. So here we come in a little bit faster, there it goes slowing down, and then it zooms off. This car is actually going pretty slow, so it's kind of hard to see the difference. And so I'm just going to make it a little bit more crazy. I'm going to crunch these down a little bit more so we can see. There we go. So it comes in fast, slows down, and speeds out. But remember, this middle section is actually playing in real time. And so what if I wanted to slow it down? I'm just going to stretch this middle section out. So it's playing fast, and then boom, slows down, and then goes fast again. That's looking pretty good. I like the speed, but you'll notice that when it plays slow, it gets kind of chunky in the middle. And I don't really want that. I want it to be a nice, smooth motion. And ideally, if you want to shoot something in slow motion, you're going to shoot it with a high-speed camera. And so instead of 30 frames a second, you might have 60 frames a second or 120, and then it can play back 2 or 3 or 4 times slower and not get chunky. For me, I'm stuck at 30 frames a second. So I'm going to show you a pretty cool trick called frame blending. Frame blending is basically taking footage, and when you slow it down, instead of it jumping in between frames, it actually creates fake frames in between the real frames. Pretty cool stuff. And so I'm going to click this once, enable frame blending, and as I go through the frames, you'll notice that I'll have a nice crisp clean frame here, and the next frame will actually be the previous frame and the next frame superimposed on each other. And so if I go 1 frame over, it's going to be the next frame, and then fake frame, real frame, fake frame, real frame, fake frame, real frame. And so what it's doing is just kind of superimposing the frames and kind of faking that motion, which looks okay, but it doesn't look as good as pixel motion. And so if I click this one more time, this turns this to pixel motion. Now look at the difference when I go through these frames. I have a real frame, and then fake frame, real frame, fake frame, real frame, fake frame. So for each frame, this car inches forward just a little bit, which is what we want because it makes that motion really smooth. But with as good as it is, everything has its drawbacks. And the drawback of pixel motion is things that aren't moving just in a line look a little bit weird. So the car looks pretty good. This is a fake frame, but the wheels look a little bit weird. And there's pretty much just no way to fix that. And that's just kind of the price you pay for not shooting at a higher frame rate. So that's what I get for shooting this at 30 frames a second. I have weird wheels. So here's my footage with pixel motion. Comes up fast and then boom. Nice smooth slow motion, except for the wheels. So it looks a lot better than having it chunky. And if you weren't looking at the wheels, you might not notice. I notice every time because I just hate the weird wheels. But maybe you have a car without wheels. Maybe you have like a magic car thing, and then you can just like pixel motion, slow motion, that thing for days. Anyway, so that's how time remapping works. Very similar to using keyframes for animating motion, but instead of telling a layer a location at a certain point in time, you're actually telling footage to play a certain frame at a certain point of time. So I hope that makes sense. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave a comment on the video. Once again, I'm Casey Ferris with RampantDesignTools.com. Thanks for watching.